Chosen one. They picked up the phone, they dialed the police, and they said your name like it belonged to a criminal. They stood there and told strangers with badges that you harassed them, that you threatened them, that you were the danger in the room. They smiled while they said it. They actually smiled, because in their mind, the story was already over. You'd get flagged, you'd get shamed, you'd get erased, and they would walk away clean like they always do. But there was one thing they forgot to check before they opened their mouths: the camera above the door. The one recording every second, every angle, every lie forming on their face in real time. That camera did not blink. It did not forget. It did not take their side. Now the same people who called the police on you are the ones sitting in a cell wondering how their own plan became their own arrest. This is not a story about revenge, chosen one. This is a story about proof, about the exact moment a lie meets a lens it cannot argue with. You already know how it felt in that room. The accusation landing like a slap you never saw coming. Grown adults, people who knew you, looking you dead in the eye and describing a version of events that never happened. And you standing there, calm, quiet, watching them build a case against a person who never existed. Before we go further, if this story is already sitting in your chest, hit like and subscribe. Not for me, for the message, so it reaches the next chosen one sitting in a room being lied about right now, who needs to know the camera never lies, even when the people in front of it do. Here's what they didn't understand about you. You didn't raise your voice because you didn't need to. You didn't defend yourself frantically because innocent people don't have to perform their innocence. They just have to wait for the truth to catch up. And it always does. While they were building their story out of nothing, something above the doorway was quietly recording the only version of events that actually mattered. And that's where this really begins. Think about how confident someone has to be to make a phone call like that. Not scared, not shaking, not genuinely afraid for their safety. Confident, composed enough to give a clear, detailed, false account to a dispatcher, confident enough to repeat that account to officers standing in front of them, confident enough to watch you get questioned and feel nothing but satisfaction. That kind of confidence doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a track record of never being checked, never being questioned, never once having to answer for a story after it left their mouth. That's the part that should make your skin crawl a little, chosen one. Not what happened to you specifically, but how easy it clearly was for them, how practiced the delivery sounded, how naturally the tears came exactly when they needed to. People don't develop that kind of fluency in dishonesty overnight. It gets built, rehearsal after rehearsal, target after target, each time reinforcing the belief that nobody ever checks, nobody ever pulls the footage, nobody ever asks the follow-up question that unravels everything. So chosen one, if you're ready to watch exactly how their own trap became their own cell, drop a 77 in the comments right now. Let them know you're still standing, still calm, still exactly who they underestimated. Now let's go through it, piece by piece, frame by frame, starting with the moment they decided your silence made you an easy target. Number 1. They built their entire plan on your silence. They never once considered that you might have proof. That's the part that should tell you everything about how they saw you. Not as a person with a memory, a reputation, a paper trail, a witness they hadn't accounted for. They saw you as an easy story, a blank page they could write whatever they wanted on, because you had never fought back before. You had always taken the high road. You had always walked away, instead of escalating. And somewhere, in their small, calculating minds, they mistook your restraint for weakness. That was their first mistake, and it was the only one that mattered. Think about what it takes for someone to look you in the eye and construct a lie serious enough to bring police to your door. That's not an accident. That's not a misunderstanding. That takes intention. It takes rehearsal. It takes a level of comfort with dishonesty that most people don't reach without practice. And they had practice, because you weren't their first target, you were just the one who happened to be standing under a camera. Ask yourself honestly, chosen one, was this really the first time they'd stretched the truth to get what they wanted, or was it simply the first time it caught up with them in a way they couldn't talk their way out of? People rarely invent a habit like this out of nowhere in a single afternoon. Usually there's a history, smaller versions of the same pattern, minor exaggerations that worked, small lies that got believed, each one quietly teaching them that dishonesty was a viable strategy as long as nobody looked too closely. This time, somebody finally did. Here's the question that probably kept circling in your head afterward. Why would they risk this? Why would they invent something this serious over something so small? Because to them, it never felt like a risk. It felt like a guarantee. They had convinced themselves that your reputation was smaller than theirs, that your word would carry less weight in a room full of strangers, that the system would simply believe the louder, more confident performance. They were betting on volume over truth. They were betting on your isolation instead of your evidence. Imagine building a house with no foundation, just stacking walls on top of sand and calling it finished. That's what a false accusation is. It looks solid for exactly as long as nobody checks underneath it. And they didn't check. They didn't think they had to. They assumed you had nothing, so they built their entire story assuming no one was watching. But someone was. Something was. And it had been running the whole time, unnoticed, unbothered, indifferent to their confidence, simply doing what it was built to do. Record the truth and hold on to it until the moment it was needed. That's the part that should sit with you, chosen one, not as fear, but as proof. They didn't lose because you fought back loudly. They lost because they built an entire accusation on the assumption that nothing existed to contradict them. And the moment that assumption cracked, everything they built on top of it came down with it. You might be asking yourself why people do this at all, why anyone would choose to manufacture a crisis instead of simply walking away from a disagreement. The answer is rarely complicated. Control. When someone can't out-argue you, can't outperform you, can't win a situation honestly, some of them reach for the only tool left that guarantees an outcome without effort. A false accusation is a shortcut, a way to skip the part where they'd have to actually be right about something. It only works, though, in a world with no witnesses, no records, no proof. They were betting on a world that no longer exists, one without a small, silent lens, quietly doing its job above their heads. Number 2, the day they called the police on you. You remember the tone in their voice when they made the call. Urgent, wounded, dramatic, like they were the one in danger. That performance wasn't for the officer on the other end of the line. It was for the room. It was for anyone watching who might repeat the story later. They needed witnesses to their fear, even if that fear was manufactured from nothing. And then the officers arrived, and something happened that they hadn't planned for. You didn't panic. You didn't raise your voice to match theirs. You answered questions plainly, calmly, consistently, the way someone answers when they aren't afraid of what the truth will reveal. Meanwhile, their story kept shifting in small ways, a detail here, a timeline there, the kind of inconsistencies that don't matter to a friend who already believes you, but matter enormously to someone trained to notice them. Here's what nobody tells you about being falsely accused. The accusation itself isn't the scariest part. The scariest part is the silence afterward, standing there while someone in a position of authority decides who to believe first. That silence feels like the longest few minutes of your life. But it's also the moment where truth starts doing its quiet work, because officers don't just listen to words, they read behavior, and behavior doesn't lie the way people do. You probably replayed that silence 100 times since, chosen one, wondering if you should have said more, defended yourself harder, filled the quiet with something louder than calm honesty. You didn't need to. The people trained to notice these things notice exactly what matters: the steadiness in your voice, the consistency in your timeline, the complete absence of the small tells that give a fabricated story away. You weren't failing to defend yourself in that silence. You were simply not performing because you had nothing to perform. Imagine two people telling the same story from opposite sides. One is measured, still, answering the same way every time they're asked. The other is escalating, adding details that weren't there a moment ago, watching the room instead of watching the officer. Which one looks like they're protecting the truth, and which one looks like they're protecting a performance? They thought calling the police would end things instantly, that the badge alone would settle the story in their favor. What they didn't understand is that police reports aren't verdicts. They're the start of a process, and processes require evidence. They handed the situation over to people whose entire job is to find out what actually happened. And that decision, the one they thought would bury you, was the exact decision that opened the door to your proof. There's something almost poetic about that, chosen one. The idea that the very move meant to finish you off was the one that started the clock ticking against them. They wanted an ending. Instead, they triggered a beginning, a case number, a file, an official record that now had to be investigated properly instead of simply believed on the spot. Every step they took to make things worse for you was, without them realizing it, a step toward a process that only gets more dangerous for a liar the longer it runs. Because processes don't lose interest, they don't get bored, they don't forget. They just keep moving toward whatever the evidence actually shows. Number 3. The room where they rehearsed their lies. This wasn't spontaneous, chosen one, and somewhere inside you already knew that. A lie this coordinated doesn't happen by accident in the heat of a moment. It gets built beforehand, in private conversations, in messages typed and deleted, in agreements about who says what and when. They synced their story before they ever said a word to anyone official, because they knew that consistency is what makes a lie believable. Imagine a group of actors backstage, running lines one more time before the curtain goes up, making sure nobody forgets their part. That's what happened before they ever approached you. They weren't reacting to something you did, they were performing something they'd already written. But here's the flaw, baked into every rehearsed lie. It's built for a script, not for reality. Real events have small, unpredictable details that don't fit neatly into a story someone made up in advance. A rehearsed lie sounds smooth the first time, and slightly different the second time, because memory of a real event stays consistent, while memory of a performance has to be reconstructed every time it's told. You might wonder how you're supposed to feel about people you once trusted, sitting somewhere planning how to destroy your name. The answer is, you're allowed to feel every bit of that betrayal. But you're also allowed to notice what it reveals. People don't rehearse the truth. Truth doesn't need blocking, staging, or a shared understanding of who speaks first. Only lies need that kind of preparation, because lies are fragile, and fragile things need scaffolding to stand. Notice something else about that rehearsal room, chosen one. Everyone in it agreed to participate. Nobody in that group said, "Wait, this feels wrong, maybe we shouldn't do this." That silence, that group agreement to go along with something they knew wasn't true, tells you something important about who you were really dealing with. It was never just one person against you. It was a small, quiet conspiracy that felt safe precisely because it assumed nobody outside their circle would ever be able to prove otherwise. While they were memorizing their version of events, the camera above that doorway wasn't rehearsing anything. It was simply recording what actually happened, without an agenda, without a script, without anyone in that footage needing to remember their lines. That's the difference between their story and the truth. Their story needed practice. The truth just needed to exist. Think about how much energy goes into keeping a lie alive. The coordination, the group messages, the constant checking in to make sure nobody drifts off script. That's exhausting work, and it only gets harder the longer the story has to survive. Meanwhile, you didn't need a single conversation to keep your version straight, because your version wasn't a version at all. It was just what happened. That's the quiet advantage honesty carries that liars never account for. Truth doesn't require maintenance. It doesn't need a group chat to stay consistent 3 weeks later. It simply is what it was, unchanged, waiting. Number 4. Why your calm made them panic. They expected you to break. That was the whole plan, if you can call it that. They needed a reaction big enough to make you look unstable, guilty, dangerous, something they could point to and say, "See, this is exactly who we said they were." But you didn't give them that. You stayed still, you stayed measured, and that stillness did something they never anticipated. It made them look worse, not better. Here's a truth about people who build accusations on lies. They need your chaos to justify their story. Your calm response doesn't just fail to help them, it actively works against them. Because calm doesn't look like guilt to a trained observer, it looks like consistency. And consistency is the one thing a fabricated story can never fully fake under real scrutiny. Imagine a lie detector that doesn't need wires or machines, just a room full of people watching how someone behaves under pressure. The nervous energy, the shifting stories, the overcorrecting explanations, all of that reads louder than any accusation spoken out loud. You didn't need to defend yourself frantically, because frantic defense is exactly what guilty people perform when they're caught. You had nothing to perform, so you didn't. They started sweating in small ways you probably didn't even notice at the time, over-explaining details nobody asked about, bringing up things that weren't relevant, almost like they were trying to fill space before someone else filled it with a question they couldn't answer. Meanwhile, you answered exactly what was asked. Nothing more, nothing rehearsed, nothing performed. That contrast is what shifted the room, chosen one. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a raised voice, just the simple, uncomfortable difference between someone telling the truth and someone protecting a lie. And once people in that room started noticing the difference, the confidence your accusers walked in with started quietly leaking out of them, one nervous sentence at a time. Imagine 2 candles in a windless room. One burns steady, the flame barely moving, because there's nothing disturbing the air around it. The other flickers constantly, bending one way and then another, because something keeps shifting beneath it. That's the difference between someone with nothing to hide and someone managing a story in real time. You were the steady flame, they were the one bending under pressure they created for themselves, and everyone in that room, whether they said it out loud or not, could feel exactly which flame to trust. Number 5. The camera they forgot was watching. Here's the detail that changes everything, the one they never accounted for when they built their story. Somewhere above that doorway, a lens had been running the entire time, recording without opinion, without loyalty, without anything to gain from either side of the story. It didn't care who was more convincing. It didn't care who cried louder or who sounded more wounded. It simply existed, patiently, indifferently, holding on to the one thing neither side could argue with. Imagine a witness who never gets tired, never forgets a detail, never changes their story under pressure, never gets talked into doubting what they saw. That's what a camera is. Not a person with feelings to manipulate, not a friend who can be guilt-tripped into silence, just a record, sitting there, waiting to be asked the only question that ever mattered: what actually happened? They never thought to ask themselves if anyone was watching, because in their experience, nobody ever had been before. They'd gotten away with smaller versions of this story in other rooms, with other people, and nothing had ever caught up to them. So why would this time be different? Why would they suddenly need to be careful? That kind of confidence only exists in people who have never been recorded telling a lie. But this time, something was different. This time, above their heads, in a small black box most people walk past without a second thought. Every second of their performance was being preserved. Every gesture, every inconsistency, every moment their story shifted slightly from what they'd rehearsed. All of it sitting there, untouched, unaware of the panic it was about to cause once someone finally asked to see it. Funny how a piece of hardware nobody thinks about becomes the single most important witness in someone's life. It wasn't there to protect you specifically. It wasn't installed because anyone predicted this exact moment. It was just doing what it was built to do, quietly, constantly, without opinion. And in doing so, it became the one thing their entire plan never accounted for. Not a person they could manipulate, not a friend they could guilt into silence. Just a lens, recording everything, owing loyalty to nothing except what actually happened. You didn't have to remind anyone it existed. You didn't have to point to it dramatically and declare your innocence. You simply waited, because you knew that eventually someone investigating a serious accusation would ask the one question that ends every fabricated story. Is there footage? There's a specific kind of peace that comes from knowing the truth is recorded somewhere, even when nobody around you has asked to see it yet. It's not smugness. It's not relief exactly either. It's closer to patience, the kind that only exists when you genuinely have nothing to fear from a closer look. Liars dread scrutiny because scrutiny finds cracks. You welcomed it, quietly, without announcing it, because you already knew what a closer look would show. Them, performing. You, simply existing, exactly as you always had. Number 6. The footage that changed everything. There's a specific kind of silence that happens in a room when someone says the words, "Pull the footage." It's not dramatic. Nobody gasps. Nobody faints. It's quieter than that. A shift in energy, a stiffening of posture. The kind of stillness that happens when people who've been performing suddenly remember that performances have consequences when there's proof in the room. Picture the moment the request goes out. Someone reaches out to whoever manages the camera system. A timestamp gets pulled, a window of footage gets isolated, and somewhere, an investigator sits down to watch exactly what happened, minute by minute, without anyone's commentary attached to it. No embellishment, no dramatic retelling, just the raw sequence of events as they occurred. This is the part your accusers never planned for, because in their minds, the story had already been told and already been believed. They hadn't accounted for the version of events that doesn't care about tone of voice or performance. They hadn't accounted for a timeline that simply plays out at its own pace, showing exactly who did what, when and how, without needing anyone's permission to be accurate. Think about how many stories in life get accepted simply because nobody bothered to check them. Most disagreements never get this kind of scrutiny. Most accusations live and die on he said, she said, on who has more friends in the room, on who cries more convincingly. Your accusers had built their entire history of getting away with things on that exact pattern. They picked situations without cameras, without witnesses, without paper trails, and when they finally picked one with all three, they didn't even notice, because arrogance doesn't check its surroundings. It just assumes the pattern will hold. This time, it didn't. Imagine sitting somewhere nearby, not even in the same room, while your entire fabricated story gets tested against a version of reality that cannot be negotiated with. Imagine watching the confidence drain out of the people who built that story, because they know, somewhere in the back of their minds, that their version and the recorded version are not going to match. You didn't need to be in that room to know how it would go. You knew, because you'd been telling the truth from the very first question, and truth has a specific quality that lies don't. It holds up frame by frame. It doesn't need adjusting once real evidence enters the conversation. While they were bracing for what the footage might reveal, you were simply waiting for the moment everyone else finally saw what you'd known the entire time. Somewhere, in a small office with a monitor and a set of headphones, someone pressed play on a file that had no idea how important it was about to become. It wasn't dramatic on their end either. Just a routine review, a case file, a video that needed to be logged and checked against a statement. But that ordinary, unremarkable moment was the exact hinge the entire story turned on. Everything before it was accusation. Everything after it was evidence. And evidence doesn't negotiate. Number 7. Every lie falling apart frame by frame. This is where it stopped being their word against yours and started being their word against a timestamp. Every specific claim they made, the version of the encounter, the tone, the sequence of events, all of it existed now not as memory or performance, but as something that could be paused, rewound, and checked against exactly what they'd said out loud. And one by one, the details didn't hold. The moment they claimed happened first actually happened last. The reaction they described as aggressive was, on screen, simply you standing still. The confrontation they swore lasted several tense minutes, lasted 11 seconds, calm, brief, nothing close to what they'd painted. Small details, but small details are exactly what expose a fabricated story, because liars build the big picture convincingly and forget that reality lives in the tiny, boring specifics that nobody thinks to fake. Imagine a puzzle that looks complete from a distance, until someone gets close enough to notice one piece doesn't belong. Once that piece gets pulled, the whole image starts sliding apart, because nothing around it was actually built to hold without that piece in place. That's what happened to their story once the footage rolled. One inconsistency exposed the next, and the next, until the entire narrative they'd rehearsed collapsed into something that looked exactly like what it was. Invented. There's a reason liars almost never survive a frame-by-frame comparison. Chosen one, even when they're genuinely convinced of their own version by the time they tell it. Memory bends toward whatever makes someone feel justified. It softens their own actions, exaggerates yours, fills in gaps with whatever fits the emotional story they need to believe about themselves. But cameras don't have an emotional stake in the outcome. They don't need to feel justified. They just show what the lens was pointed at, indifferent to who needs the story to go a certain way. You weren't in the room for this part, but you didn't need to be, because the truth doesn't require your presence to defend itself. It had already been recorded. It had already been waiting. All it needed was someone willing to actually look, instead of simply listening to whoever spoke first and loudest. Somewhere in that footage was the version of you that never got to speak in their story, the version standing calm, saying almost nothing, doing none of what they'd claimed. And once that version showed up on screen, undeniable and unedited, their entire accusation stopped being a story people had to choose to believe. It became something people had to actively ignore in order to keep pretending. Notice what didn't happen here. Nobody had to raise their voice on your behalf. Nobody had to campaign for your reputation online, post long explanations, or beg anyone to reconsider. The footage did the one thing no argument ever could. It removed the need for belief entirely. You don't have to believe a timestamp. You don't have to trust a recording the way you trust a person's word. It simply shows you what happened, and once it does, choosing to disagree with it isn't skepticism anymore. It's denial. Number 8. The friends who went quiet then, loud now. Here's a truth that stings a little, chosen one. Some of the people standing nearby when the accusation happened knew it wasn't true. They didn't say anything. Not because they were confused, but because staying quiet felt safer than standing next to the person being accused. Silence, in moments like that, isn't neutral. It's a choice. And it's usually a choice made to protect comfort rather than truth. You noticed who didn't reach out. You noticed who suddenly got busy, who stopped responding the way they used to, who decided this was a good time to stay out of it entirely. That absence taught you something about the difference between people who like you when it's easy and people who stand next to you when it isn't. But now that the footage has spoken, watch how quickly some of those same people rediscover their voice. Now they remember details they conveniently forgot before. Now they're eager to mention that they always had a bad feeling about the accusers, that something always felt off, that they're so relieved the truth came out. Funny how conviction shows up right on schedule, exactly when it stops costing anything to have it. Imagine a group standing around while someone gets blamed for something they didn't do, everyone glancing at each other, nobody speaking first, until one voice with real credibility finally says what actually happened. Watch how fast the rest of the group finds their courage the moment it's safe to agree out loud. There's a specific kind of person who shows up loudest after the danger has passed, chosen one, and learning to recognize them early saves you a lot of future disappointment. They weren't lying when they said they always believed you. They just weren't willing to say it while it might have cost them something. That distinction matters more than it seems to in the moment, because belief that only speaks up once it's safe was never really courage. It was just good timing, dressed up to look like loyalty. This isn't really about punishing anyone for staying quiet. People are allowed to be imperfect, cautious, unsure of what to say in a hard moment. But you're also allowed to notice the pattern, to remember who showed up when it mattered, and who only showed up once the outcome was already decided. That knowledge doesn't need to turn into bitterness. It just needs to inform who you trust with the next uncomfortable moment in your life. Because loyalty, tested only in comfort, was never really loyalty to begin with. You don't need to give a speech about it. You don't need to call anyone out by name in a group chat or demand an apology for the silence itself. The clearest message you can send is simply noticing quietly and adjusting quietly, giving your energy from here forward to the people who don't require proof before they choose a side, and letting the fair weather ones sit exactly where their fair weather loyalty put them. Distant, uncertain, no longer fully trusted, and entirely aware of why. Number 9. The person who wouldn't let it slide. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, someone did their job properly, and that mattered more than they'll ever fully know. Not everyone in a position to review a case does it carefully. Some people take the loudest story at face value and move on. But this time, someone actually sat down, watched the full footage, checked the timestamps, compared the statements line by line, and refused to close the case just because one side had spoken first and spoken with confidence. That kind of diligence is easy to take for granted until you're the one depending on it. Someone with the authority to simply believe the first version of events chose instead to verify it. That decision is the entire reason the truth had a chance to surface at all. Because evidence without someone willing to examine it is just footage sitting untouched in a system, waiting for a question nobody asked. Imagine an investigator watching a story fall apart in real time, noticing the exact moment a claim doesn't match what the camera shows, and instead of shrugging it off as a minor detail, deciding it changes everything about how the case has to be understood. That's not dramatic heroism. That's just someone doing the work the badge is supposed to represent. But in a world where so many stories never get checked this carefully, doing the work properly can feel like the rarest thing of all. Think about how many people never get this. How many quiet, honest people have stood exactly where you stood, telling the exact same kind of truth, and had nobody bother to check the footage that could have cleared them. That's not meant to make you feel guilty for the outcome going your way. It's meant to remind you how much weight rested on one person choosing to actually do their job instead of taking the easier path everyone else seemed happy to take. You didn't ask for special treatment. You didn't need anyone to take your side emotionally. You just needed someone willing to look at the actual record instead of settling for whoever performed distress the most convincingly. And that's exactly what happened. Not because the universe orchestrated some grand rescue, but because the truth, once someone finally checked, was impossible to argue with. This is worth remembering the next time you feel like the system is stacked against quiet, honest people. Sometimes it is, but sometimes someone on the other side of the process is paying more attention than you expect. And that attention is the difference between a false accusation sticking and a false accusation collapsing under its own weight. Give credit where it's due, chosen one, even quietly, even privately, to the version of the process that worked the way it was supposed to. Not every system fails. Not every authority figure takes the shortcut. Somewhere in the middle of everything that felt stacked against you, one person chose diligence over convenience. And that single choice is the reason the truth had room to breathe instead of getting buried under whoever spoke first. Number 10. The masks that fell in front of everyone. There's a specific kind of unraveling that happens once a lie gets exposed in front of the same audience that originally believed it. It isn't loud, nobody announces it. It happens in small, uncomfortable shifts, people avoiding eye contact, conversations that used to include your accusers suddenly excluding them, invitations that stop showing up, group chats that go quiet the moment their name comes up. They had built an entire identity around being the wronged party, the victim, the one who needed protecting from you. And for a while, people believed it, because outrage is easy to perform and easy to believe when it's the only version of the story anyone has heard. But once the footage entered the conversation, that identity didn't just weaken, it collapsed completely. Because you cannot be the victim of something the evidence proves you invented. Imagine a masquerade where everyone is wearing an elaborate costume, fully convincing under dim lighting, until someone turns the lights on fully, and every seam, every flaw, every piece of the disguise becomes impossible to ignore. That's what happened here. The dim lighting was people only hearing one side. The full lighting was the footage, undeniable, unedited, showing exactly who built a story out of nothing. Watch how differently people treat someone once they know that person lied about something this serious. The benefit of the doubt disappears. Every future story they tell gets quietly questioned. Every dramatic claim gets met with a little more skepticism than it used to. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. Trust, once broken this publicly, doesn't rebuild on its own timeline. It rebuilds slowly, if at all, and only through actions, not apologies. It's a strange kind of prison, chosen one, the one built entirely out of your own credibility running out. No walls, no bars, just a slowly shrinking circle of people willing to take your word at face value, until eventually there's nobody left who does. They built that prison themselves, one convincing performance at a time, never realizing the currency they were spending so freely was the exact thing they'd need most, the moment the truth finally caught up with them. You didn't have to expose them yourself. You didn't have to tell a single person what you knew to be true. The truth did that work on its own, in its own time, in front of the exact audience that once believed the opposite. And there is a specific kind of quiet satisfaction in watching a lie fall apart without ever having to raise your voice to make it happen. There's no comeback for that kind of collapse, chosen one. You can rebuild a reputation after a mistake. You can recover from a bad decision people forgive over time. But recovering from being caught fabricating a criminal accusation against someone who did nothing wrong, that's not a bad decision people quietly move past. That's the kind of thing a room remembers every single time your name comes up again. Number 11. The sound of handcuffs closing on them. This is the part where the story stops being about reputation and starts being about consequences that follow you far beyond a group chat or a room full of witnesses. Filing a false report is not a small mistake. It's a decision with legal weight, and once evidence proves an accusation was fabricated, that decision doesn't just embarrass the person who made it. It follows them into a system that takes lying to authorities seriously. Picture the shift in their posture the moment they understood the footage had been reviewed and didn't support a single detail of what they'd claimed. The same confidence they walked in with, the same performance that once fooled a room full of people, meant nothing in front of a timestamp. Nothing about tone, delivery, or emotion can undo footage that simply shows what happened. You weren't there for the moment consequences finally caught up to them, and you didn't need to be. This isn't about savoring someone else's downfall. It's about recognizing that actions eventually meet outcomes, even when it feels, in the moment, like lies are winning simply because they were told first and told loudly. Consequences move slower than accusations, but they move. Imagine spending weeks convinced you'd gotten away with something, only to watch that certainty crumble the second someone with real authority says the word evidence. That disorientation, that sudden reversal of who's in trouble, is the direct result of a story that was never built to survive scrutiny in the first place. There's a particular kind of quiet that follows an arrest like that, chosen one, different from the noise that came before it. No more confident phone calls, no more dramatic retellings to anyone who'll listen. Just paperwork, procedure, and a system moving forward at its own pace, entirely indifferent to how loudly they once performed their version of events. The performance only ever worked on people. It never worked on process. You didn't do anything to them, chosen one. You didn't retaliate, didn't manipulate, didn't build a counter-narrative. You told the truth consistently and let the process do what it was designed to do. And in the end, the very system they tried to weaponize against you became the system that held them accountable instead. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles over you at this point in the story. Chosen one, not triumph exactly, more like exhale. The kind of breath you didn't realize you'd been holding since the moment they first opened their mouths and lied about you in front of strangers. You don't have to celebrate this loudly. You don't have to post about it, explain it, or perform relief for anyone watching. You just get to feel it, quietly, the way people feel things when a weight they'd been carrying without complaint finally, actually lifts. Number 12. The version of the story that finally became official. Here's something people underestimate, chosen one. Once a false accusation gets investigated and formally cleared, it doesn't just disappear back into rumor. It becomes something documented, something official, something that exists on record the same way the original accusation did. That matters more than it might seem to in the moment, because rumors fade in and out depending on who's telling them. But an official finding doesn't bend depending on the audience. It says what it says, permanently, on paper, in a system that doesn't care how anyone feels about it afterward. Think about what that means for every future version of this story anyone tries to tell. The people who want to whisper a slightly softened version, the ones who want to say it was complicated, that there were two sides, that nobody really knows what happened. There's now an answer to that, not an opinion, not a guess, an official record that closes that door permanently, whether they like it or not. Imagine two versions of a story sitting side by side. One is a rumor, shaped by whoever repeats it, changing slightly, with every retelling, softened by whoever wants to protect the person who started it. The other is a case file, unmoved by gossip, unaffected by who's more likable in the room, simply stating what the investigation found. That second version is the one that survives. That second version is the one that matters 5 years from now, when someone brings this up in passing and someone else says, "Actually, that got investigated, and the footage proved it was false." You didn't need to control the narrative going forward, because the narrative had already been settled by something more durable than opinion. That's what official findings do, that whispered gossip never can. They don't need to be defended, repeated, or kept alive by anyone. They simply exist, permanently, available to anyone who asks the question later. There's a certain freedom in that, chosen one you might not fully register until months from now, when someone brings up a vague, half-remembered version of what happened, and instead of feeling that familiar tightening in your chest, you simply say, "It was investigated, it was cleared, look it up," and watch how quickly the conversation ends. You don't need to relive it. You don't need to defend yourself all over again. The record does that now, permanently, on your behalf, whether you're in the room or not. Number 13. Why they can't just move somewhere else and start over. Here's the part that probably hasn't fully hit them yet, chosen one, but it will. A false police report isn't something that quietly resets once enough time passes. It follows a specific kind of trail, one that shows up during background checks, one that surfaces if they ever try something similar again, one that any future employer, landlord, or partner could potentially uncover with the right kind of digging. They didn't just damage a relationship with you. They created a permanent mark in a system that doesn't forget just because they'd prefer it did. Imagine trying to build a fresh start somewhere new, a new job, a new social circle, a new version of the confident performance they've always relied on, while carrying a record most people never have to think about. Every background check becomes a small moment of risk. Every reference call becomes a variable they can't fully control. That's not a punishment you have to deliver. That's simply the natural consequence of choosing to weaponize a system that exists specifically to hold people accountable for exactly this kind of thing. And here's what makes it even heavier for them. They can't blame you for it. They can't say you ruined their life because you didn't do anything except tell the truth when asked. Every consequence they're facing traces back to a decision they made themselves, alone, before any camera, before any officer, before anyone else got involved. That's the kind of outcome that's genuinely difficult to be angry about, because there's nowhere else to point the finger except back at themselves. You get to walk away from this with something they don't have, chosen one. A clean record, a documented truth, and a story that ends with you exactly where you started, unbothered, unchanged, simply vindicated. They get to walk away carrying something they built entirely by themselves, and no amount of moving somewhere new is going to make that disappear as easily as they're hoping it will. Picture them years from now, sitting across from someone new, someone who doesn't know this story yet, feeling that familiar pull to bend a small detail here, exaggerate a moment there, and hesitating, just slightly, because somewhere in the back of their mind, a memory surfaces of the last time confidence like that collapsed in front of a screen nobody thought to check. That hesitation, small as it is the real, lasting consequence. Not the record itself, but the fear the record leaves behind, quietly reshaping how boldly they ever try something like this again. Number 14. The apology that came too late. Watch how quickly people find humility once denial stops being an option. Suddenly there are messages. Suddenly there are half explanations dressed up as apologies. Sentences that start with, "I'm sorry," but somehow spend more time explaining their side than acknowledging what they actually did. That's not remorse, that's damage control, and there's a difference between the two that becomes obvious the moment you've lived through both. A real apology doesn't need footage forcing it out of someone. A real apology shows up before the consequences arrive, not after they've already landed. What you're hearing now isn't regret over hurting you. It's regret over getting caught. And those two things sound almost identical until you listen closely enough to notice which one keeps circling back to protect their own image instead of genuinely reckoning with what they did. Imagine someone rehearsing an apology the same way they rehearsed the original lie, carefully choosing which parts to admit and which parts to soften, still performing, just with a different script this time. You don't owe your piece to a performance, even one dressed up as an apology. You're allowed to accept an apology without pretending it erases what happened. You're allowed to move forward without needing them to fully understand the weight of what they tried to do to you. Their timing tells you everything you need to know about the sincerity behind it. And timing, more than words, is usually the most honest part of any apology that only shows up after the truth already did the work they refused to do themselves. There's no obligation on you to respond to any of it, chosen one. Not the messages, not the mutual friends passing along softened versions of their regret. Not the awkward run-ins where they hope a small nod means everything is forgiven and forgotten. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, happens on your timeline, not theirs. And it certainly doesn't happen just because ignoring you finally stopped working out in their favor. You get to decide what closure looks like for you, and it doesn't have to include letting them back into any part of your life just because the footage forced them to admit what they already knew from the very beginning. Number 15. Case closed. Why this was never random. Here's what this entire story comes down to, chosen one. You didn't win because you fought the loudest. You didn't win because you had the most support in the room when it mattered. You won because you told the truth consistently, and the truth, unlike a rehearsed story, doesn't need to be maintained. It simply exists, waiting for someone to check. They built an accusation, assuming nobody was watching, assuming your silence meant you had nothing, assuming their confidence would be enough to carry a lie all the way to the end. What they never accounted for was the quiet, patient, unblinking presence of a camera that didn't care who was more convincing, only what actually happened. And in the end, that was the only witness that mattered. This wasn't luck. Luck doesn't explain footage that happened to exist in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. What it explains is that truth, when it exists, tends to leave evidence behind, while lies, no matter how carefully rehearsed, tend to leave inconsistencies. You didn't need the universe to intervene dramatically on your behalf. You needed patience, and a system willing to look closely enough to find what was already there. So the next time someone underestimates your silence, chosen one, remember what it actually was. Not weakness, not passivity, not fear. It was patience, with a plan behind it, even if you never consciously called it a plan. It was the simple, quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to perform innocence because they never had anything to hide in the first place. That's a kind of strength most people never develop, because most people panic the second they're accused of something. You didn't. And that single difference, more than any camera, more than any footage, was the real foundation this entire outcome was built on. If this story moved something in you, chosen one, drop a 77 in the comments one more time and let it be known you understand exactly what it feels like to be underestimated by people who never checked if the truth was watching. Hit like, subscribe, and if this message helped you feel seen today, consider dropping a super thanks below to keep these stories reaching the people who need them. You stayed calm when they needed you to break. You stayed consistent when they needed you to contradict yourself. And in the end, the very story they built to destroy you became the story that destroyed the version of themselves they tried to convince everyone was true. Case closed, chosen one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.